All right. Yes. We're going to kick off volume 2 now of Emma. And this is our first time talking about it. We finished it just last night.
Yeah,
and I did.
I will say my reading was quick.
Yeah.
So I may be a bit spotty on aspects of this. I have some things to say, but
Well, I'll just kick off by saying, okay, like we have lots to say about Frank, lots to say about Jane. But to me, I have remarked often, and I'm kind of looking, there's so many examples. But to me, and I've said this about every novel, when she is on, I think that Austen maybe has no peer among novelists for the literary device of dialogue. I'll go ahead and be a broken record and say that again. Mm-hmm. Like, man, it's like people are really talking. Mm-hmm. Like when she's being a total gossip and recklessly so about Jane Fairfax with Frank at the ball. And
that is a scene.
That conversation is just crazy. I mean, it's like, I don't care who you are, if you can read English. And I'm trying to find what chapter that is. But it's like
around the middle.
Yeah, she's being so freaking horrible. And he clearly knows more than she does and is kind of egging her on. Mm-hmm. He's like, oh, dude, it's about the piano. She's like, oh, yeah. Bet you that's because she's flirting with Mr. Dixon, Right. Bet she's a hussy. And she's like, I can't find it, but she's like saying these words. And Churchill clearly has feelings for Jane that he is performatively disguising. Right. And he's like, oh, tell me more. Well, and she does.
And there's this suggestion that John Knightley has secretly bought the piano because he's like fallen in love with her.
Or no, George Knightley.
Or George.
Mrs. Weston thinks that George Knightley, and that's when we realize Emma has a thing for Knightley that she hasn't faced because she's like, it can't be that, and that continues. That carries volume 2.
I thought there was some suggestion that the married Knightley.
Oh no!
Okay.
No, I think that Mrs. Weston is quite sure that George Knightley wants to marry Jane.
I think I got confused about which Knightley was which there, maybe.
But,
but there's a lot to do with this piano. Before we get to that, though, let me just say something that struck me right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. I think on the third or fourth, well, it's a little further in than I thought. On the very beginning of chapter 2, volume 2. There's this kind of increasing tension, excitement at the arrival of Jane Fairfax.
Right. You get the whole story in chapter 2.
Right. Who I think, interestingly, is called Jane Fairfax.
Yeah.
And not Miss Fairfax.
Right.
And so there's this kind of interesting kind of thing there, but I triple underlined this section at the next to the last paragraph on page 113. The plan, this is talking about how Colonel Campbell took over her raising after she was orphaned. The plan was that she should be brought up for educating others. The very few £100 which she inherited from her father, making independence impossible.
Right.
And what really struck me here is the way that they are using the word independence.
Yeah.
In this setting. In this book, being independent means not having to work.
Yes.
It doesn't mean being able to provide for yourself.
Yeah.
It means being so rich that you can provide for yourself without working.
Yes.
And I think this is a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
Right? I remember being...
It's also a mark of whether you're really a gentle lady or not.
Right.
If you work, you're not a lady.
Right. And hence Jane Fairfax instead of Miss Fairfax.
Yes.
Right? But I remember being in a graduate seminar years and years ago with this guy who was in Mississippi, but this guy was a Chicagoan, and very classic Chicagoan, and a hardcore Marxist. And I can't remember the context of this conversation, but somebody else in the seminar, another student, was distinguishing between the working class and the non-working class characters in the story.
Yeah.
And the Chicago guy, the Marxist, was like, wait. what are you using to tell the working class from the non-working class people? And the short answer was essentially, well, they're rich and they're not. And the Marxist is like, no, see, that's where you're starting off wrong. Just working class means that if you don't work, you can't support yourself.
Right.
And so they are rich, but they are rich because they work.
Yeah, like a heart surgeon is working class.
Right.
Yes.
And so he was making this I think important distinction that
Yeah.
like class is not just about how big your bank account is. It's about how you know. And I think this book is very specific about that. Right. There are these characters who are like, we meet the Coles later, who are very nice people by all accounts, but merchants.
Well, and Austin or Emma for a long time was like, ugh, I'm not going to their party. But then when she was the last one to be invited, she wants to go.
Right.
And it's because they're merchants that there was ever even a question.
Right. And so this idea of, you know, independence, like we might here in the sort of comfortable, sort of, you know, cushy 2025s, say some version of, you know, well, of course a woman should have her independence. But we mean something very different from what the narrator here means when they're talking about Jane Fairfax not being independent. And I think that is really telling in this world. Like it is for real, all or nothing. Like either you can support yourself come hell or high water, or you're garbage. You know, I mean, and I know it's not quite that fine a point, but that's kind of the direction that this novel is going. That you are suspect socially if you cannot support yourself on an independent bank account.
And this is partially, well, this is completely why Frank is at the mercy of Aunt Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
He and Jane are mirrors of each other in this way.
Yeah.
And they both, the tragedy that we're experiencing in Volume 2, right, is that Jane is moving freely in this world occupied by your Woodhouses and your Knightleys. But there's always the danger that at any minute she's going to be snatched away. And Jane herself even says, oh, well, you know, at any minute, like, my destiny will happen. It's like the scythe hanging over her head. To go work. That's what it is you're going to have to get a job. Like, that is the Black Death, the sword of Damocles, if you will, hanging over her throughout Volume 2. And it's funny how Emma, at one point, it's like, one of the reasons she doesn't like Jane is she gets tired of, like the phrase is something like crying her up. Like, she's just tired of everybody, the sad story of Jane.
Jane.
Yeah,
like Marcia.
Yeah. It's like crying her up or something. And it's like, oh, how terrible for you, Emma. Like, you know, somebody else is the center of attention for a minute. But yes.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think in this way, you know, I can't remember if I said this earlier. This is a novel littered with orphans. Mm-hmm. Churchill, Fairfax, Harriet, and there are these interesting parallels. I mean, Jane is a version of Harriet, right? But she's one. Instead of having been raised by this boarding school, Jane has been raised by an actual sort of upper class family,
whose sister or whose daughter became best friends with her. And again, I think, like, Emma is pretty convinced by the time we finish Volume 2 that Jane has encouraged the attention of her sister's husband and maybe even done more. And so, like, Emma thinks that Jane is secretly like a femme fatale, like a horrible person. Right. In this world where, oh, you've been taken care of by this gentleman, this very wealthy landholder, and you're scuzzing around with the daughter's man.
Yeah.
I just find that to be so interesting that Emma is charging her with this.
Well, and at the same time, Jane invokes the closest thing to shame that we've seen in Emma, besides maybe what Knightley can do. And it's the night after the dinner at the Coles that that she's thinking about how much better Jane plays the piano.
Yeah.
And she like actually is moved to practice.
She practices for like
an hour,
half an hour or something. Yeah.
And Harriet comes in and compliments her, and she says the great line about comparing my playing to Jane's is like the lamp to the sun.
Right.
And so on the one hand, Emma is fully aware of Jane's superiority.
Yeah.
At the same time that she is inferior.
Yeah.
Right? That she is this she should be little Harriet Smith, like a safe, sort of companion who's not going to ever like compete too much. Mm-hmm. But then Jane shows up and it's just like, damn, like she is good.
And then of course, we learn a little bit more about George Knightley's tastes whenever he is making his final case to Mrs. Weston and Emma about how he could never love Jane, but he also says, I don't think she would accept my proposal even if I gave it to her. And Emma's like, wow, well, you're not conceited, I'll give you that, right? Because Emma's understanding is anybody Knightley proposes to is going to say yes, because he owns everything. By the way, as a rivulet to that, I found it interesting that Emma's primary worry about George Knightley marrying Jane, at least on the surface, is that right now, since George is unmarried, all that property is going to go to John Knightley's son, Henry, Emma's nephew. Right. And so Emma's feeling very protective of Henry and sees Jane as a potential predator.
Who's going to ruin this
Henry's prospects.
Orderly, yeah.
And it's just interesting to me, since we know what's going to happen, which is that Emma herself is going to get... to the extent that they love each other, of course she's going to make sure that Henry is set. And by all accounts, John is capable of taking care of his own family anyway. Right. But it's clear that George Knightley is, as the oldest son. John works. John Knightley has a job.
Right.
Like, a lot of the conversations he has with George are about, like, business and money, and that's what John does.
Right.
He's out of town on business sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's interesting that, her worry is that Jane's going to get Henry's estate, but then she's going to be the one to get it.
Right. And in a way, this is the happy ending, right? Because she trusts herself not to displace,
Don't we all?
Don't
we all believe that if, I'm trustworthy.
I will be generous, yeah. So, there is this kind of interesting thing. I'm pretty fixed. I was just flipping through trying to find this sequence, and I thought I had underlined more of it, but I didn't see it right off. Maybe you have it marked better than me. But the sequence at the Coles, while Jane is playing, when she and Frank Churchill are talking about this gift of the pianoforte, and I was thinking a lot. I maybe even have the book. Yeah, right here, Honor and Slavery. This kind of great book that I've relied on a lot over the years. That talks about kind of the social structures, especially the male social structures of the antebellum South, and I think it has a lot in common with some of this Regency era stuff that we see in Jane Austen. And one of the things that Steph Greenbaum writes about in Honor and Slavery is the difficulty of the gift, right? That like two men in the Old South couldn't like one man just couldn't give another man a gift,
right?
It made the recipient somehow beholden. It made him into a slave in a way. And so it became this very complicated kind of ritual. Gift giving had to always be reciprocal in order to sort of maintain this sort of social order. And I think one of the things that we see happening with this gift of this piano is it's so big. I don't know the economy of this moment as well as I might, but a piano is not a small present.
Don't they make a big deal out of how this is a particularly large, expensive one too? Even because they compare it to other pianos.
Well, so the forte is already kind of like its own kind of, and I think it's more like a spinet. It's a little smaller, and they say, well, it's not a grand pianoforte.
Okay.
So it's not the largest of the versions, but they say. But in a way, it's all the better a gift for being smaller because then it fits into Bates's house.
Yeah.
And not only that, but they hear it there is this moment, and I have to say, as an acoustic guitar guy, I really felt this moment.
Yeah.
There's something about these instruments, these kind of, I guess I'll say old-fashioned instruments that are just like metal and wood.
Yeah.
They have a spirit, they have a tone, and you can really hear the difference.
Wasn't there a concern like, well, we'll see how much this person loves her. Did they make sure it was toned properly?
Right.
And then it was.
And there is almost this bitter moment when Emma's like, "Oh God, it sounds good."
Right, right.
And it is this indication of like real attention to detail.
Mm-hmm.
That it is a not some Chinese knockoff, right? This is like the real deal, and partly this is about Jane Fairfax's skill in coaxing the tones out of this thing, but it's also about this secret giver's sort of understanding, his memory of what of what she cares about.
Somebody who is both that intelligent about the craft of music, depth of feeling enough to understand Jane Fairfax and think about what she would like, and with the economic resources to back all that shit up by buying the thing.
Right.
So this is a moment where we're to be like, maybe this woman's not going to end up having to work for a living, right? Like somebody's caring. Right. So I remember what I was going to say, though, about Knightley disclaiming, well, I would never marry her, even though I don't think she'd have me. And I found his reason interesting. He and Emma have this in common. Knightley likes big mouth, talkative, well, he says open-tempered, but I interpret it as like women who talk a lot. Like Jane is, she's that kind of beautiful. You know what I mean? Yes, she plays music, and yes, she is down to earth and a good person. But whereas, I think Knightley's point is, okay, I dig all that, and I'm going to make sure things are okay for her. But, like, I don't know, man. Like, I kind of dig Emma's, while ridiculous, open temper. What does it mean? What does he mean by open temper? Because Emma certainly has it. Let's talk about that a little bit. What does he mean by that?
Yeah, I don't.
What does he dig?
Yeah, I don't remember. I don't have that exact moment in my notes. But
it's pretty late in the reading, as I remember.
Yeah.
We're having a hard time finding passages.
Well, like I said, I was a bit rushed, catching the end of this. Especially.
Well, the whole reading ends with Knightley, against his better judgment, smiling at something Emma says.
Yeah.
So, but I'm going to find it because he says,
"Well,
I want a woman with an open temper."
Right. While you find that, I will start off saying I'm somewhat distracted. Right. We have several examples of women in this society by the end of Volume 2, and the one that I think occupies most of our attention towards the end of Volume 2 is Mrs. Elton.
Mrs. Elton, yeah.
But I think, one of the things, and I don't think I've made a secret of this, but I don't much like Mr. Knightley.
Right.
And in sort of the same way that I don't much like Emma. I think that they are these people who have benefited from a lot of privilege, who kind of know it and kind of just think it's their due.
Yes.
And that is a hard thing for me to read and not. I mean, right? We all live in the goldfish bowls that we live in, and I get that. And and somebody in Malaysia might look at me and say, "Well, dude, you too, right?" Which I suppose is not unfair, but I find them hard to like.
Definitely.
In this way, and I feel like one of the things about Knightley is, first of all, Knightley has waited a really long time to marry. Which makes me wonder,
It's like 33.
I thought older than that. I thought closer to 38.
Okay.
It says in Volume 1.
Yeah. He's definitely in his 30s.
But he is not a young man, which makes me wonder, like, what has he been doing?
Yeah.
Right.
Other than grooming Emma.
Right, and maybe it's just that I've seen like one too many, brothel scenes in Bridgerton or whatever, but it makes me think that
one doubts he's a virgin.
right, that Knightley has been out and about.
Yeah.
In whatever way that he has this, he can wait because he has resources in whatever variety, and maybe if they're not sexual resources, they're something else, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. But I feel like he also he makes this claim to superiority, oftentimes to Emma, right? And it's a version of like, oh, I don't like the regular girls, that he sees through the superficiality, and because he's a superior person, he likes this open manner. Because he finds it to be sort of honest, unlike these fake bitches.
Yeah.
But there's a fakeness and a performativity
To that.
in itself. And
It's a line that people have been using in bars for as long as there have been bars.
Can we just?
Can you imagine Larry from Three's Company in a bar?
Right.
Yeah,
Can
I don't
we just
like.
cut through?
I like girls like you. I don't like all those other girls.
Let's skip the small stuff. Let's get to something real.
Yeah.
This sort of Tom Waits character.
Yeah.
In a seedy LA bar, going like, look, we could do all that, but we both know.
Yeah. Let's get to the real stuff.
We're both people of the world here.
So I found that to that
Okay.
they're talking. This is on page 133. Oh no, wait, I'm sorry. 198. 133 had a different thing I wanted to ask about, but she's like, Emma, of course, is a liar. Her reason, or at least, it's complicated. Like, partly, I think we're supposed to figure out by now, it's not really Henry she's worried about. She is digging on Knightley. So to this extent, maybe this part I'm going to read is true, but it's just weird, where she says, "Oh no, upon my word, I've not the smallest wish for your marrying Jane Fairfax, or Jane anybody. You would not come in and sit with us in this comfortable way if you were married." So, okay, maybe that really was Emma being honest. Like, yeah, because I want you to myself, right? Knightley was thoughtful again. "No, Emma, I do not think the extent of my admiration for her will ever take me by surprise. I never had a thought of her in that way. I assure you, Jane Fairfax is a very charming young woman, but not even Jane Fairfax is perfect. She has a fault. She has not the open temper with which a man would wish for in a wife." And then at the end of that section, "Jane Fairfax has feelings, says Mr. Knightley. I do not accuse her for want of feeling. Her sensibility is a spectre strong, and her temper excellent in its power of forbearance, patience, self-control, but it wants openness. She is more reserved, I think, than she used to be, and I love an open temper."
Well, this is really interesting.
And then at the very end, just to tee you up even more, 216, the end of the volume, "How seldom I ever 2 hours from Hartfield." This is Emma talking. "Why you should foresee such a series of dissipation for me, I cannot imagine." She's like, "I can take care of my nephews. Like, I don't need you popping your ass in here, right?" He's like, "Oh, well, you're so busy with Harriet." He's like teasing her, right? She's like, "I believe I can handle my nephews."
Right.
And as to the dear little boys, I must say that if Aunt Emma has not time for them, I do not think they would fare much better with Uncle Knightley, who is absent from home about 5 hours from where she is absent 1, and who, when he is at home, is either reading to himself or settling his accounts.
Right.
And then the end of the volume, Mr. Knightley seemed to be trying not to smile, and succeeded without difficulty upon Mrs. Elton's beginning to talk to him. So, is that what he means by open temper? Just a girl? Is it sort of like Darcy and Elizabeth? Like, is that what's up? Like,
just like laying it out, maybe. But at the same time, roll this back to near the beginning of Volume 2 on page 117, and Emma, who we know has had complicated and ambivalent thoughts about Fairfax all along.
Yeah.
Emma is sort of, reacquainting herself with Jane after she arrives again, and she said, where is this? They had music. This is the top of 117. They had music. Emma was obliged to play, and the thanks and praise which necessarily followed appeared to her an affectation of candor an air of greatness, meaning only to show off in higher style her own superior performance. Wrapped up in a cloak of politeness, she seemed determined to hazard nothing. She was suspiciously reserved.
Yeah, I underlined that too. Disgustingly reserved. So her and Knightley both don't like the reserved.
And then towards the end of the same passage, was he handsome? Right? She's asking about Mr. Frank Churchill.
Yeah.
She's asking Jane about seeing him in the city. Was he handsome? She believed he was reckoned a very fine young man. Was he agreeable? He was generally thought so. Did he appear a sensible young man, a man of information? At a watering place or in a common London acquaintance, it was difficult to decide on such points. Manners were all that could be safely judged of under a much longer knowledge than they had yet had of Mr. Churchill. She believed everybody found his manners pleasing. Emma could not forgive her.
Yeah, she won't gossip.
Right, and then chapter 3 begins. Emma could not forgive her.
Yes.
Right, and so this reserve, disgusting reserve, right, is almost taken as a kind of mortal sin, right? And I'm thinking,
is it because Emma feels that she has the right to know everything? Like, how dare this woman not answer my questions?
Well, this is what I think. This may not be the answer, but this is kind of how I've been thinking about this. Is the currency, the commerce of relations in this world is the sharing of notes, the sharing of letters, there's the revelation when Mr. Elton is engaged.
Right.
And everybody's mad that they're not the one who gets to sort of spring the news.
Right.
It's Knightley who's like, oh, da 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 da, and then Bates is like, what? I was gonna
Yeah.
And this idea of knowing things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in a world where money doesn't matter anymore because everybody has it.
Yeah. It's what you know.
It's about knowledge and taste. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody becomes a producer. Nobody's playing the instruments anymore. They're all Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
And it's all about this knowledge and taste. And so Jane Fairfax is hoarding her sensibilities. She's not like contributing to the economy.
And even Knightley's bothered by this.
Right.
That's so interesting.
She's a freeloader, in this sense.
So like Knightley's so hypocritical because on the one hand, everything he's judging Emma harshly for, every damn single thing, is exactly why he prefers her to other women.
Right.
Which is Jane Austen's fun little trick. Like, I know anybody that watches this is going to be like, duh.
Right.
But it is something worth thinking about. Why would this be?
Well, I mean, okay, so I think the argument here, one of the arguments is that Austen is trying to expose the sort of fundamental injustices of her world.
Yeah.
And one of them is that you have to pretend to hate this thing that you like and then do some unbelievably long way around sort of gymnastics to claim the thing you like is something else so that you can then marry it or sleep with it or whatever it is. And so, Knightley feels this external pressure to disapprove of aspects of Emma's behavior.
Yeah.
At the same time that he's obviously drawn to it, has probably been cultivating it, right, in whatever way. We see Churchill playing the same game with her.
Yeah,
right?
although
he's testing the waters.
Yeah, although I think the difference is it's pretty clear, just based on Emma's own cluelessness, right, that all this business about Frank being into her is a construct that's in Emma's head only. Well, I think that Frank is enjoying Emma thinking she knows everything about Jane. Frank too is a hoarder. We still don't know what he was doing in London, but we know he damn sure didn't go all the way there just to get his hair cut. Right. We know that Frank is beholden to this aunt, and we should talk more about this, like how sympathetic Frank is. But in his own way, Frank is a hoarder. Like, he likes to. The difference between him and Jane is, as a man, he has the ability to like draw Emma out and be in a position of strain. Oh, really? You know,
Well,
he enjoys Emma. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's thinking about her that way.
Well, one of the things that continues to arise in the plot, just
Yeah.
in the contrivance of the plots, right, is how to move the women from place to place.
Yeah.
It's
You mean physically?
Yeah, it's such
Yeah.
an ordeal.
No wonder
right?
Woodhouse is freaked out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You know there's snow or there's rain or there's puddles or
Right, they
you know,
freaked out because Jane went to get the mail
and it
in
rained-
a light
and it rained.
drizzle.
Yeah, and you know and there's this I think lovely little exchange like this reversal the night of the Coles party where Emma arrives right behind Knightley's coach and she's thrilled that he is kind of donning the mantle of the noble.
Yes.
Because usually he just walks places.
Yes.
Like some kind of poor.
Right,
You know?
right.
And now here he comes with the horses and the
Yeah.
carriage. And then it becomes I think at Churchill's suggestion it becomes problematic. Because then it's like no he brought the horses so that he could take Jane Fairfax home because he didn't want her walking home in the cold and
Yeah,
it becomes this whole complicated network of logistics that
Yeah.
the women must be moved around in these ways that require a lot of care and show and theater and
Even though in that same world, Austen's heroines almost all are vigorous, healthy, long walkers.
Right.
So it sort of exposes. Well, even Jane is like, I wish y'all would quit freaking out that a girl went and checked the mail in the
Right.
rain.
Right.
Emma herself is a huge walker, just like
Right.
Elizabeth Bennet was.
even her father,
Yeah.
right, who thinks everything's going to kill him,
Yeah.
even he goes for these long walks.
And so these constructs, I think, are more about protecting manhood than they are about protecting womanhood, which aren't most patriarchal constructs
Right.
that.
And so I think a lot of what Knightley's doing here, I mean, in this sense of liking Emma for her openness but also kind of complaining about it bitterly. I mean, this is the trap. I mean, this is like this is the trap of patriarchy.
Yeah.
Is that like you want it, but you also get to deny it. Like you get to cultivate it while you also say you'll never be perfect. You will always fall short because you do this thing, which, by the way, really turns me
I
on.
like what you do. Yeah. And isn't it weird too that in a sense people always credit Jane Austen with modernizing, like, I mean, you can go back to Shakespeare with something like Much Ado About Nothing to see that Austen didn't invent this. But modernizing that rom-com model where they must start off not liking each other, or at least having serious problems with each other.
Right.
Like, I guess the older sister in Sense and Sensibility always liked the guy that she was going to marry. There was no drama.
Yeah, there didn't seem to be.
But Marianne, drama. Elizabeth Bennet, lots of drama, right? And so Mansfield Park, all kinds of fucking drama because it was first cousins, which ooh.
Right.
And so then here, it's like, okay, somehow there seems to be this belief by Austen that it makes it more fun. Like, I think everything you're saying is right about the trap of patriarchy. But I think Austen seems to believe it just makes it more fun if the man and woman start out with some playful hostility
There must be difficulty.
Yeah.
Right. There must be a journey.
Yeah.
And this is how you create that journey.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I suppose you could have a war, or some other natural disaster, but there has to
But
be
most
something.
relationships do not work that way, right? Like every now and then when people tell their story, married people talk about how they got together, every now and then it'll be like, well, we didn't even like each other at first. But usually it's like, well, somebody asked somebody out precisely because they liked them, right? Like, it's kind of odd to me that we need that journey,
Right.
As a way in so many rom-coms,
Well, I mean, it's the fantasy.
Yeah.
I think in there is that love is conquering something.
Yeah.
Right. It takes the power away from love if it can just sort of like happen. Right.
Right.
Then it's just an accident.
Which makes Harriet's feelings for Martin so much more easily dismissible, perhaps,
Right,
by Emma. It's
prosaic.
Y'all didn't even not get along for a minute.
Right.
Like,
like you never once stormed out of the room.
Yeah.
And vexed him.
Yes. He must be vexed.
Right. And so, but also, I mean, I think, there is this long tradition of like love being for the lower classes,
Right.
right? And these people in Emma's world, like they have to make good matches,
That's true.
and so there's this machination, there's this negotiation, that it's not good enough for Emma to like somebody, like they have to be the right sort.
Well, we haven't even talked about it yet, but like, my wife mentioned it yesterday, though, like you can't really talk about Emma, and we still have lots to get to with Churchill and Jane, so this one might run a little longer, but I mean, we have to address the basic fact of, we touched on this in volume 1, Emma says she's not going to get married, and, Dana's point yesterday was, can you blame her? I mean, Austen makes it very clear, like Austen doesn't pull punches. Like, she has Emma say to Harriet, why would I get married? Like, I run this whole thing.
I've got all the stuff.
The estate is hers.
Right.
Like, when Mr. Woodhouse dies, it's all hers. There's no, like, weird...
There's no entail.
There's nothing.
There's no,
he's rich
there's
and
no
she's going to
cousin
get it.
off in the distance.
Isabel is fine because she's with John Knightley and she believes that George Knightley's money is going to flow to Henry anyway. But she's all set up and she's like, I tell my father what to do. I run the house. I'm in control here. Why would I get married? And so you're absolutely right that to the extent that love is for others, though, what about this? If that's the core truth of the novel, that Emma's living the dream, why is it that she spends so much of volume 2 pouting that Frank might not be? She wants people to be in love with her.
Yes.
So is this like a way of kind of rich people like cosplaying poor? Like she wants to experience that love under the dock among the fishmonger and the cloth seller or whatever.
I don't know if that's what she wants.
Okay.
I'm not convinced. She may well.
Right.
But if she does, what she also wants is the social status that comes along with being publicly pursued. I think she wants to be judged valuable.
She wants people to know that Mr. and Mrs. Weston's son is chasing her, because she's very gratified when she hears Mr. Weston overhears him saying to the wife, see, I told you he was into her. Like that, she would rather have that than the actual attention.
Well, look, I think, there's all this kind of independence she has, right? But her father is also independent, right? But what Emma also wants, maybe, is love.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, look, I can't read this book without thinking part of what's going on is that Emma's horny.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's why she's a busybody.
I mean,
she's horny and she's lonely.
Right. And
I think lonely, but horny works.
It feels like a cheap shot to say, and I don't mean it in that cheap way.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's a thing. You're 20 years old, and like, stuff's happening.
And you're not dating anyone.
It's been happening for a while.
And it's weird because everyone's recognizing that you're hot.
Right.
But still, Eldon tried.
Right.
We'll give him credit.
Right.
We probably need to talk about Mrs. Eldon.
Well, I want to get to her, but
Eldon tried, and she was like, well, no, I'm horny, but not that horny,
And this is the tragedy of the upper class.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the poor just do it. They just get it over with. Right? Mm-hmm. Because they don't have to worry about this legacy. They don't have to, this idea of being an unwed mother is not so tragic.
This is what happens every day.
When you're down on the farm, like these things just happen and like you work them out.
Yeah.
The same way you do like in the kitchen of a restaurant, or whatever kind of, basic minimum wage job where you have young people all in one place.
Mm-hmm.
That ultimately like rich or poor, like you're around people all the time, you've got a physical body, right? So I think there's lots of things Emma could want here.
Yes.
I think to the extent that I think there might be physical desire, I think the book is asking us to kind of consider that mostly sublimated. Mm-hmm.
And we saw that one critical article about Marianne and masturbation. So there are critics who read sexual subtext as you can't separate it from Jane Austen. We know that scholarship exists.
I've thought a lot about the kind of Freudian implications of women like Jane Fairfax, being so good at the piano. Yeah. Right? That there's a certain kind of like, kind of obvious and crass comparison to be made with playing instruments, right? And so I suspect, that readers, even genteel readers of the day would have been like, in whatever way. It's a thing. We know, right? But I think one of the things, one of the maybe tragedies, maybe horrors of Emma is I think she has sublimated that sexual desire into a social desire. That what she wants is credit for being desirable.
Yeah.
Right now, she maybe also wants the sex and maybe also wants the attention and all the other stuff. But I think it feels like the main thing, and I think it's because this is the game she learned to play. The main thing is to be seen being seen.
Yep. And yet, and maybe this is why, despite himself, Knightley likes her so much, yet for all these things about Emma that make her unsympathetic, the truth is that she is a fantastic conversationalist. I think one of the things about her is, even though she enjoys being seen, what sets her apart from Mrs. Elton, I think a big difference that Knightley sees and everyone sees, is that Emma really is fun to talk to. Like, again, going back to Austen's skill with dialogue, those conversations with Frank, those conversations with Mrs. Weston, and with Knightley, and with Jane, even. Sometimes even with her father. You could just sit and listen to it all day. I mean, she's good. She goes deep. She sometimes lies and sometimes doesn't. And again, it's like a Tom Waits song. It's like, well, the way you're lying, I dig it, right?
She's got this good sense of play.
Yes. Like, she has turned conversation into an art. She doesn't play piano like Jane, but she certainly talks like an artist.
Well, she has substance, I think, is what we're trying to say here.
And perhaps that is one of Jane Austen's arguments, given, Marianne and Ellen, given Elizabeth Bennet, given Fanny. Although Fanny, I think, is different. Mansfield Park's just weird. But here, too, that a woman's currency a lot of times is her sex, yes. But when sublimated into conversational prowess, that's also a really valid weapon that will land like a big fish of a husband. Like, if you're good with the words, that becomes like just almost like an outstretch of your sexual power, right? I mean, does that make sense?
I think you're exactly right. I think, it's all these sort of subtle signals.
Yeah.
When I was younger, one of the truisms were women who smoked.
Yeah.
Were just better in bed.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't actually put money on that.
Yeah.
But it was, that there were sort of boundary crossings and risk takings.
Yeah. It's like wearing pants in the early part of the 20th century.
Maybe so, something like that, right?
Yeah.
That it was this being willing to, express appetite, publicly,
right,
in any form,
right,
became a signal, of some sort. And I think Emma is like ambitious. She's expressing, various kinds of ambition and appetites in that.
Even the matchmaking, she wants to be in control.
But the way she does it
is
so much more pleasing than the way her father does, or, to segue in, so much better than Mrs. Elton does.
Yeah, what do you think about Augusta Hawkins as a character? So
we're obviously supposed to understand that Mr. Elton has gotten his feelings hurt. He in some way. Let me open with a question,
all right,
and then we'll swing back around to your thing. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about this scenario, right, is Emma is trying to set up Harriet with him.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks he's pursuing Emma.
Mm-hmm.
There's this confusion and then this revelation. So one of the questions I have is, in this world, was there any possible way for Mr. Elton to go, oh, I didn't understand, I guess I would marry Harriet? Like could he, after having sort of, violently made love to Emma, is there any way he could have went, well, now that you mention it, Harriet's fine too?
You mean if he was a different kind of person?
Well, I mean, like, within this world, like would Emma have accepted, this?
There must be that possibility, because Emma thinks he's going to marry her, unless she's just so fucking stupid, and I don't think socially she is.
Well, but I mean, after he reveals
Oh.
that he's been after Emma.
Oh.
Like, is there a way that he could switch to Harriet?
That reminds me of that great episode of Seinfeld where they talk about the roommate switch.
And they have to work out.
Yeah,
and there's the montage, the kind of like heist level.
Yeah, he's like, it can't be done. And,
Right.
And, yeah, you know, I think in this case, if Elton were a different kind of person, I think that contra Knightley's argument, this won't work, Harriet's birth is too low. Contra that, I think Emma probably had a point that Harriet's lineage is up for debate.
And regardless, she's just good enough.
And that she's already been introduced into high society. And that Elton, if he were a different kind of guy, could have probably pulled that off, since that's what Emma wanted anyway.
Well, I wonder though.
Okay.
Right? I mean, the obstacle I see here is
Okay.
Emma.
Okay.
Like, or it's not even an obstacle. Like, I guess the question I'm asking is, were Elton to just be like,
Okay.
well, I mean, she's good too.
Yeah.
Like, does Emma walk away from that feeling slighted in this way that she can't
Interesting.
forgive?
So, like,
Right.
Emma's better off never knowing that it was her that he wanted. Once she found that out, he was dead to her?
Well, I find myself thinking, okay, like we're like in a similar situation, but I'm Emma, right? I'm setting my friend up, and then the other person's like, but I thought, right? If they end up with that friend, I'm always going to sort of doubt the legitimacy of their feelings, and I'm also gonna wonder just a little bit, like, are we just interchangeable? Is that how you see it? Like,
Okay.
You know, and
Gotcha.
And there's this devaluation of everybody
Gotcha.
in the process. So I
Now,
asked
Austen
that.
escapes this dilemma, though, by making Elton a complete prick.
Well-
Because he says things like, it wouldn't matter to me if she lived or died. That's a
Right.
strong language to get
It
in the
is-
whole book.
It is, right.
Like, he says, I don't
Yeah.
care if she dies.
Dude,
like,
like,
you know, you thought when she was sick, I
I
cared.
wasn't even.
Yeah, yeah.
But so I asked that because I think
Okay.
it's germane to the question you're asking.
About Augusta.
Right, because I think one of the things that the novel does is it puts him in a position where he must now look entirely outside of Highbury.
He's got to.
He cannot. Like, this is why he leaves town.
Yeah.
He's like, everything's poison now.
Yeah.
Right. Because I've declared for Emma, and if I pick anybody else, she's going to think I just like I couldn't reach this one apple, so I found the first one on the ground.
Okay.
You know.
I got you.
And so he has this pressure to go, do this, and I think we are supposed to understand that Augusta is his punishment. That he
For what exactly? Just for being a dick?
yeah for being wrong, for wanting too much, for wanting not
Yeah,
enough,
yeah.
for thinking too highly of himself,
Something.
He's
a bad guy.
All of these things,
Yes.
all of these for not being with the program,
Right.
that he should have just been better somehow.
Okay.
And because he has to rush off and save face, like what he should have done.
Okay.
Right? In a proper sort of like heroic gentleman Jane Austen style, what he should have done is gone off and moped for like a year.
Yeah.
Right? He should have gone for long
That's
walks.
some real soul searching.
And
like, maybe it turns out he spent some time in Tibet with some monks.
Right, grown a big beard.
Yeah.
Like what is it in Sense and Sensibility? What's his name? He's like doing these long walks and reading at the same time.
Right.
Right. He should be profoundly damaged by this, right?
Yes.
And it's the fact that he's not that I think
Right.
demands his punishment. The fact that he can go marry means he has to marry badly.
And the woman he marries, you mentioned earlier your book,
Yeah.
Honor and Slavery. I don't know how strong the suggestion is here, but it looks to me like maybe her brother-in-law's wealth comes from the slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. What about this moment on 207? So, this is Augusta talking to Emma. A situation such as you deserve and your friends require for you is no everyday occurrence, is not obtained. Oh no, she's talking to Jane. Mm-hmm. She's trying to talk Jane into, I guess, doing everything she wants her to do.
Because she wants Jane to be like the governess of her children later on, or something.
Or her friends.
Yeah.
And so, your inexperience amuses me. Situations as you deserve and your friends require for you is no everyday occurrence, is not obtained at a moment's notice. Indeed, we must begin inquiring directly. Jane says, Excuse me, ma'am, but this is by no means my intention. I make no inquiry myself and should be sorry to have any made by my friends when I am quite determined as to the time. So this is all about her getting a job.
Right.
I am not at all afraid of being long unemployed. There are places in town, offices, where inquiry would soon produce something. Offices for the sale, not quite of human flesh, but of human intellect. Augusta, oh, my dear, human flesh, you shock me. If you mean a fling at the slave trade, I assure you Mr. Suckling was always rather a friend to the abolition. I did not mean, I was not thinking of the slave trade, replied Jane. Governess trade was all I had in view. What's even happening there? Like, is Augusta covering for her brother being in the slave trade, or is she just like, hey, listen, I know I'm a bitch, but I don't deal in the slave trade. Like,
Right.
come on. Like, what happened there?
I think we're going to see more about this,
Okay.
right? Was it Mansfield Park?
the father has dealings in India.
Yeah, or in the Caribbean. I think,
Somewhere, Antigua.
Yeah, and I think that this is on Austin's mind.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is kind of interesting, right? Because they don't really mind all this poverty like right down the street, but slavery is too much.
But that is where a lot of the wealth is coming from.
Exactly, right? And I was reading a little bit about the kind of the nature of the wealth, and the exact numbers that they seem to be able to produce. That they can say like so and so has 200 pounds, and in some of these cases, right, these were direct investments in the government. They just bought government bonds,
right,
and those bonds paid a certain annual dividend, and they lived on that dividend.
Yes,
which, like, by the way, like, must be nice.
Yeah,
right. But at the same time, right, like where's all that government wealth come from? There's this kind of interesting kind of network of stuff at play here, right? Because the father in Mansfield Park, like, we shake our finger at him, for being so directly involved in this, like, sugar plantation slave business. There's even this kind of suggestion in some takes of that story that he's spending so much time in Antigua because he's sleeping with the slaves. But at the same time, like, if you're investing in England, in this moment, I mean, where does that wealth come from, right?
And so the abolitionist movement, I mean, I'm not quite clear when England banned but I know when they banned availing themselves of the slave trade, they conveniently grandfathered the companies that already were doing it. That came up in Mansfield Park also, right. I think, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, well, you guys can keep doing it because you already depend on it, but nobody else gets to do it.
Yeah.
And so that's interesting, and I think that it's also, though, goes back to your point about work. As trash. So Jane, though quite good, I think gets splashed with a little bit of snobbery there too. Where she does. Augusta's right. Like, you did just compare looking for a job to being on the slave market. Right. Like, and then she covered herself and it's like, no, I meant the governess trade. But it's like, I think there is this moment, don't you, where Jane's thinking, damn, I'm going to be like a slave because I'm going to have a job.
Well, there is this misgiving.
Yeah.
Right, that I think on some level is fair, right? In this world, and frankly, in any world, right? I'm not gonna name names on this, but a friend, somebody we both know, hired a live-in babysitter at one point, who was shockingly good looking. And my first thought, just reflexively, I'm not saying I'm proud of it, but my first thought was, this is going to end badly.
Yeah.
It didn't.
Right.
And I was sort of amazed.
Yeah.
But there was just this part of me that's just like, oh, you got to be kidding me.
Right.
And for no good reason other than, like, all the stories.
It's
right?
narrative, yeah. In biology.
Well,
right.
Yeah, but like, I mean, it is shocking to me, like, this is a small aside here, like, how often the celebrity gossip, these like, millionaire men married to, like, undeniably top shelf attractive millionaire women who then, like, lose it all because they, like, sleep with the nanny.
Right.
And you think to yourself, like, how can that be? But obviously it makes a weird sense somehow because it just happens
'Cause,
over
yes.
and over and over again.
Just the intimacy of the situation.
Something like that. Something like that. And so on the one hand, there is, I mean, not to sound, I fear I sound too much like Jordan Peterson here, but there is this weird moment where one cannot just like hand a woman money without some weird tickle, some weird sense of threat, some weird sense of like, is this okay?
So she's thinking, when I go on the job market, there is a way in which I'm prostituting myself.
I think
just by being on that
I think
market.
there was always this hint. I mean, it's the same reason when
Edith Wharton had the same thing, right? Whenever was it Lily Bart that like her grand collapse was having to work,
right,
like make hats or something.
Yeah, and early modern women not being allowed to act because it was just too close.
Yeah.
It was just too close to prostitution.
Yeah.
And I think in this page, this is what I'm going to say to try to extricate myself from some of this, right? Yeah. In a patriarchy, in so profound a patriarchy as this one, any time a woman directly receives money, it is a threat. And the way to manage that threat is to taint that exchange, to always make it feel dirty, to always have like this hint of promiscuity connected to it. I remember being shocked, and I shouldn't have been, but I remember being shocked. I think it was the very first episode of Mad Men, where Christina Hendricks, who plays Joan, the great character Joan, is orienting a new sort of hire in the typing pool.
Yeah.
And one of the things she does, just as a matter of course, is arrange for her to see a doctor so she can get put on birth control. Because it's a given that they're going to all be sleeping with the dudes in the office.
Yeah.
And I think the suggestion is kind of like whether they want to or not.
Yeah.
And so, that's just like part of the deal. And I think there is this kind of, underlying, and I'm certainly not trying to suggest that as a governess she would also be a prostitute.
Right.
But I think there is this underlying threat or underlying risk that has to be managed by the society. And I think we see Mrs. Elton kind of narrating the way that management happened.
And I guess we're supposed to see it as gauche that she is so actively into Jane getting a job.
Right.
Like everybody else is like trying to put it off because it's the worst thing.
Right.
And she's like, I'll make it happen right the fuck now.
Let's go.
And Jane's like, whoa, it's a little vulgar.
Right.
Like we know it's coming, but like let's not, hurry this thing. I'm still playing piano over here.
And part of that is Jane also managing the threat of this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right? And so part of Mrs. Elton's problem, right, is that, she's vulgar, right? And she doesn't understand the way all of this works in Emma's world, in Knightley's world.
Well, there's something about this world that is, yes, it's a patriarchy, but obviously, as we've talked about before, within this patriarchy, Emma, Mrs. Bates, and others establish a kind of bizarre matriarchy mirror world within all of Highbury, where it's the women that are like secretly running the show. It's very stereotypical in this way.
Right.
But like when Elton's new wife rolls in, because he doesn't go mope for a year, he rolls in from the outside with a new woman.
It feels like a matter of weeks.
Part of her problem is she's going to be an interloper no matter what. Right. First of all, Emma already didn't like Elton. Mm-hmm. Second of all, how dare you come in with opinions? And, it's almost like Mrs. Elton couldn't win anyway. Like, you can't just come in and be a participant. Like, you almost get the impression that what Emma and others would like to see is some groveling for a few years rather than just, hey, let's start what is a music club.
Right.
It was like, that is awfully,
even
presumptuous of you that I'd be in a club with you.
Well, and even after saying that she didn't really know anything about music.
Yeah. So that's horrible. But before we, one thing I want to say, and then I want us to close by talking about Frank, because I think Frank, in his own way, is kind of the ingenue of this book too, male ingenue. Yeah. I noticed a little detail here that the internet did not help me solve. Frank once, and the narrator once, refers to Mrs. Weston as his mother-in-law. I have never in my life heard that appellation used that way. Like, it's always stepmom, and like I've just never heard mother-in-law or in-law.
Right.
I've never heard in-law used as a way of expressing anything other than like
The other side.
person who got married,
Yeah.
their parents, or I mean the sister-in-law, right? But like, and this is one of those topics my brain doesn't fully work, but it's like, maybe stepmom didn't exist as a term.
I mean,
But it was a little weird that he called her his mother-in-law, and I wonder if that's just normal for the time. Like,
I'm imagining it is.
Okay.
I mean, she legally becomes his mother when she marries his father, so she becomes the mother-in-law, perhaps. I don't know the history of that term either.
yeah,
And I wonder if, in an era before divorce, that there wasn't as much of a need for a term for that second wife.
like, or stepmother.
Right.
But stepmother existed, as early as the early 1800s because the Grimms sure fucking used it. I mean, that's the reason I know that.
Or
It's
is
'cause
that
fairy tales?
Or is that just how that got translated?
I don't know. I don't read
Right.
German.
I know we have that wicked stepmother
Yeah.
sort of cliche, but yeah, I it's an interesting. We should look into that. I think it's probably incidental, though. I think
It
it's
is.
more a vocabulary
Although,
thing.
more substantively, you talked about this a little bit, but at the beginning, like, part of what makes Frank kind of saucy is that he, like, acknowledges that Mrs. Weston is hot. She's not that much older than him, right? And Emma's like, well, you probably shouldn't call her that. But I like hearing that. But you don't, that's your mom, like your figure, your mom figure, whatever.
Yeah, there's some light scolding there.
But Frank also pleases everyone. Like, he's doing the right thing when he walks Mrs. Weston around on her arm. Like, they thought he was being disrespectful by not coming to do this early enough.
Right.
So he comes, he does all this duty. He clearly has some complex stuff going on with Jane Fairfax. He's teasing her on the one hand, but oh boy, always coincidentally, he manages to be right where Jane is.
Yeah.
He certainly finds Emma charming and talks, her to death. He can match her conversationally. You pointed out Knightley might have a point about duty, but I guess as we close this up, I mean, I rather think that not only are we supposed to like Frank, although we're supposed to think Emma misunderstands him, I think we're supposed to like Frank, and I think at the end of the novel, I'm almost certain we're going to be supposed to like him even more, and that Knightley's going to be the one that was wrong. How are you feeling about Frank Churchill in Volume 2 so far?
So I think Emma likes Frank, but she distrusts him.
Yeah. The haircut bothered everybody.
He's an unknown quantity.
Yeah.
There's a line early on in Volume 2, 133, second paragraph there.
Yeah.
They've been talking about sort of his life at Inscombe, I think is how you say it. But when satisfied on all these points and their acquaintance proportionately advanced, he contrived to find an opportunity, while their two fathers were engaged with each other, of introducing his mother-in-law, and speaking of her with so much handsome praise and so much warm admiration, for so much gratitude for the happiness secured to his father, and her very kind reception of himself, as was an additional proof of his knowing how to please. And there's this kind of Eddie Haskell quality. There's this kind of like, what a lovely dress, Mrs. Cleaver.
Yeah.
I think part of Emma's distrust is this kind of like relatively clear set of indications that Frank Churchill is a dandy and a flatterer.
Yes, he is. He is.
And this only gets you so far. Right?
Yeah.
He also doesn't have the openness. Right. He doesn't have the reserve. That
He's
Fairfax
a good
has.
conversationalist.
Right. But he is not to be trusted fully.
Okay.
That he knows how to please. I think is suggesting that he is less than fully honest in this conversation. That he is acting a part.
And Jane too.
Right.
Jane too, maybe. I mean, Emma swears to God that Jane's keeping secrets, right?
Well, but keeping secrets is one thing, but pretending to be something else is different.
Right.
I mean, Jane may be true to herself in the secret keeping.
Yeah.
But I think we're supposed to understand that Churchill has sort of ulterior motives.
Yes.
and that he is flattering with an eye towards strategy. I think this haircut, it partly bothers people because it's typical. Like, of course, he's the kind of guy who would spend all damn day going back and forth to London to get his hair cut. Right?
Yes. And then they have to get over that.
Yeah, spoiled.
He's a coxcomb.
Yeah. And so I think there's some reason to be doubtful of Churchill. I think that this gossip about the piano that he is doing with Emma, I think this is strategic. I think he is testing certain waters. He's preparing the way for certain narratives. Certain kind of moves, kind of social and otherwise. And then this this departure back at the end of Volume 3. This departure, because his aunt is sick.
Right, and nobody believes this for a minute, right? They're all like, oh, well, yeah, she's pretending to be sick so that he'll come home.
Right. And so it's become this whole thing with him. I don't know. I think ultimately what we're going to find is that everybody in this immediate circle around Emma is somehow redeemed and reasonably well settled by the end of the novel. And some of it is going to be people sort of recognizing their shortcomings and sort of atoning for them, and some of it is going to be people getting their due.
I think that's right. I mean, Elton, you just suggested that's why he married.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, for the life of me, I can't find it, but you said something about Frank having that Eddie Haskell quality of aiming to please, and how there's something a little too slick about him. And I think that's fair, but again... And I think this is where I kind of move in the opposite direction of what you were saying about Mr. Woodhouse. I don't remember where it was, but it's when they were talking about the party. Mm-hmm. He just is so fucking over the top with the women that it's a little bit like he's a creeper. He's like, young ladies should this and that. And he's like with both Jane and with Harriet. I mean, it's a little bit like... Dude, if I made a play into that scene where he's talking to them, I guess it's at the Coles party. It's somewhere where he's like, young ladies are like precious plants, he says, or something like that. And young ladies are this, and you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that. And it's like, I could do a relatively dark, humorous adaptation of a play where he's like touching her the whole time while he's giving those lines, like maybe putting a little bit of an Austrian accent into it. You know what I mean? Like, like he... Would it be fair to say that he uses his sickness as an excuse to be kind of touchy and feely? Like, oh, I'm just innocent Mr. Woodhouse, and I can't even go outside, so, come sit with me. Like, you think it's a fair hit that he's a little bit of a creeper himself with these girls?
I think it could be.
Yeah.
I think it could be. I mean, I think, It's a hard distinction to make sometimes.
Yeah.
Is he a guy captured by this world that just treats women badly?
Yeah.
Or is he a guy treating women badly?
Yeah. Or is he so frickin' chivalrous as to be a caricature? I just don't believe it.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. It's hard for us to look back.
Yeah. Even
the relatively short time, back to this world, and really take it seriously.
Yeah.
That people's interests were what they said they were.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think all the men to some extent here are problematic.
Yeah.
Maybe with the exception of John Knightley.
Right. Maybe the farmer.
Right.
Martin.
Right. Yeah. These guys who sort of like found a woman, got married, like went about their business.
Yeah.
But the other guys, they all seem to be kind of like making plans. Scheming.
Yeah.
In whatever way, and so it's an interesting sort of question. In what way are they able to keep themselves clean and aloof from some of the terribleness of all this?
And I guess what we'll be discussing next week at the center of all this is going to be something you said about half an hour ago, which is obviously the whole thing is going to be Emma realizing oh gosh, I was wrong about everything and a bad person. Now I'm better, an epiphany of sorts. And the extent to which Austen pulls that off skillfully is going to be what makes her a great novelist. That's going to be the expectation of Volume 3, right? We feel this way.
Yeah, I think Volume 3 has to be her redemption, and somehow her redemption is going to open up space in this community for other people to kind of like fall into the right places.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if, and I mean, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, I guess, it's almost as if this entire world of Highbury has been built so that once Emma is properly sort of situated, everything else will make sense.
Yeah.
You know, that she literally is the center of this universe. And you know, in that sense, the romance then becomes kind of a metaphor.
And the only of the 6 novels where the character's name is the title of the novel.
Right.
What do you think about that? How does that go in concert with what you're saying?
Well, I mean, I think what happens is the romance becomes a metaphor for this broader sort of social arrangement, right? That you know, Emma and Knightley, which is undeniably where this is headed, that Emma and Knightley, getting past whatever it is they have to get past to recognize their fitness for each other.
And somehow they've got to play a part in making things right for both Harriet and Jane.
Well,
because with Jane, she's the damsel in distress. We want Emma to like Jane. We want Jane to be okay. And with Harriet, she's got to end up back with the farmer because Emma kind of blew it for her and owes it to her to fix that.
I think what we're going to see is a kind of clockwork world.
Yeah.
Right? It is currently broken. But once Emma and Knightley come together,
yeah,
this basically repairs the machine that puts everybody on the proper track.
Yeah.
Right? And then everything just kind of clicks into place.
Everyone but the Eltons will be better off.
Well, and I would argue that in this world, right, one of the things that the machine does is punish the bad, and that Mr. Elton, for whatever his sin is, whether it's reaching or not reaching, you know, like he has already kind of been situated.
How sad for the people of the property, though, because I don't think this is the only novel she's done this. I think that one of the real jerks in Sense and Sensibility was also a vicar. Is that right?
Yeah.
Like, how sad for these poor people, these people to whom Emma ministers, that passage you called attention to in Volume 1.
Yeah.
Who do they go to when they're sick and destitute and they need the most help? It's going to be the Eltons,
right,
who have been set up as just these horrible people. That kind of sucks, right? Like, there's the spiritual guidance of all these poor people has been turned over to this monster.
Well, and we see that in, is it Sense and Sensibility or Pride and Prejudice, where you know getting that job, you know, as the vicar in the sort of private chapel, you know, is this kind of sinecure? It's this.
Well, in Mansfield Park,
is that where it
Edmund
is?
wants
That's
to be
That's what it is.
But the guy who already has it gets promoted to what you're talking about. Like he gets to go to London, and be in one of those like sanctioned.
Well, but even these local vicarages, right?
Yeah.
Right. The Lord is going to provide you with an income.
That's right.
It's going to be relatively small.
You get your own house.
You know, but you know you get to be kind of a big shot.
Yeah.
Without having to have been a big shot.
That's right.
And this is part of the reason that we distrust these figures, right? Because they're somehow unnaturally being elevated, you know, without having earned it in some way. Yeah. And so I don't
So it makes me wonder about the question of Jane Austen and religion. Like, is she sort of being Marxist there and saying, it's just the opiate of the masses and that's all? Like, none of this. I mean, in Mansfield Park, she does go relatively deep with Edmund's faith is real.
Right.
And so is Fanny's. And so they're deeply Christian. By the way, they're cousins that are going to get married. And doesn't get much more biblical than that.
Well,
you know?
the other thing, too, I think to keep in mind there is there's religion, and then there's the Church of England, which is this institution, right, that has a lot to do with the wealth, right? I mean, is it Knightley whose property used to be a monastery?
Is that right?
Somebody's property used to be a monastery.
Yeah.
Until Henry took that land from the church and started giving it to his supporters, presumably one of Knightley's ancestors.
That's right.
And so you know, I may be misremembering which, but one of the important figures here, you know, has this kind of property that was stolen from the Catholic Church,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah.
Who, of course, stole it from somebody else
Yeah,
first.
yeah.
But so I think there's also this question, like the vicar, is he a man of God or is he a bureaucrat?
Yeah.
And I think the way we see them in Austin, they're treated as these kind of like shift managers.
Yeah.
Right. And so despisable because they're not really there for moral upbringing as
They're
much.
they're not there to really minister to the spiritual needs of the people in the vicarage.
They're there to manage
Yeah.
the social hierarchies,
Yeah.
from one particular angle, I think. So,
Which is sad and sucks.
but I think
Yeah.
it also it is just another way for Austin to kind of throw a body blow at this broader society
Yeah.
that she thinks needs to be taken down a peg.
That's a great way to end our discussion of Volume 2. Jane Austen
good.
does have some socially critical points to share for all our
agree.
ambivalence.
I agree.
So, all right.
Sounds good.
Excellent.